Before I tell you the rest of this story, I need you to understand something about my daughter. She was the kind of person who remembered everything. My blood pressure medication, my follow-up appointments, the exact day my car insurance renewed. She called every evening at 8 o'clock, not 7:59, not 8:02. 8 o'clock on the dot. And the first thing she always said, before hello, before how are you, before anything, was the same question. Dad, are you home alone tonight? For 2 years, I thought it was love. I want to go back to the beginning, because I think that's the only way any of this makes sense. And honestly, I'm still not sure it makes sense, even now. My name is Leonard. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years working as a high school history teacher in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I coached JV baseball for 12 of those years. I drove a used Ford F-150, and I made my own coffee every morning, and I thought I had a pretty good read on people. Turns out I didn't. Not even close. My wife Sandra passed in the spring of 2019. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to funeral was 9 weeks. I still can't talk about those 9 weeks without my chest tightening, so I won't. What I'll say is that afterward, I was a different person living in the same house with the same furniture and the same coffee maker, and nothing felt like it fit anymore. My daughter Miriam was a godsend in those first months. She drove up from Philadelphia every other weekend. She cleaned out Sandra's closet when I couldn't bring myself to open it. She sat with me at the kitchen table and didn't try to fill every silence with something cheerful. She just sat there. That mattered more than she'll ever know. My son Thomas lived in Phoenix. He called when he could, sent money for my birthday, flew in for the holidays. He wasn't cold, he was just far away. In every sense of the word. He had 3 kids under 8, and a job that owned him. I understood. I did. So it was mostly Miriam. And then the phone call started. Every night at 8. Dad, are you home alone tonight? I figured it was worry. She'd watched her mother disappear in 9 weeks, and I think some part of her was always bracing for the next bad thing. So when she asked, I answered, yes, just me. Watching the game. Reading. Nothing special. She seemed to relax when I said I was alone. I noticed that, but I told myself it was because she didn't want me to feel like I was missing out on something. Like she'd feel guilty if I had company and she wasn't there. That's what I told myself. I should have asked more questions. In the fall of 2022, I started thinking about my finances in a serious way. I'd been putting it off. It felt morbid. Like admitting something. But my doctor had mentioned my cholesterol numbers were climbing, and I figured it was time to get my house in order. I met with a financial advisor named George, a quiet man with reading glasses permanently pushed up on his forehead, and we went through everything. My pension, my savings, the house. The house was the big thing. Sandra and I had bought it in 1991 for $127,000. George told me it was worth somewhere between $340,000 and $360,000 now. I knew the neighborhood had come up, but hearing the number still surprised me. George asked if I'd updated my will recently. I hadn't touched it since 2008. He strongly recommended I do. He also, almost as an aside, mentioned that I might want to think about a life insurance policy. Something modest, he said, just to cover funeral costs and any remaining debts so my kids wouldn't have to deal with it. I called Miriam that same evening to tell her I was finally getting things in order. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked a lot of detailed questions. Which financial advisor? What firm? What we'd discussed specifically. I thought she was being thorough. I thought she was being responsible. I signed a $200,000 life insurance policy in December of that year. Miriam asked me about it twice in January. Just checking in on things, she said. Making sure everything was finalized. That's my daughter, I thought. On top of everything, what I didn't know, what I had no idea about, was that Miriam had been in serious financial trouble for almost 3 years. I found this out much later, pieced together from conversations with her ex-husband, and from things she eventually told me herself. She and her partner at the time, a man named Roy, not someone I ever liked if I'm being honest, had taken out 2 personal loans totaling nearly $90,000. They'd used most of it trying to start a catering business that collapsed in about 14 months. The business was gone. Roy was mostly gone. The debt was very much still there. She'd been making minimum payments. The interest was eating her alive. She'd borrowed from a friend. That money was gone too, and she was starting to get calls from a collections attorney. I knew none of this. She never told me. Every time we talked, she sounded fine. Tired sometimes, but fine. The 8 o'clock calls continued through the winter and into the spring. Dad, you home alone tonight? Yes, sweetheart. Just me. Good. Just wanted to check on you. I started to notice other things around that time, though I didn't connect them into any kind of picture. When Miriam came to visit in March, she walked through the house differently than she used to. Not casually. The way you walk through a house you grow up in, more slowly. She opened the door to the basement and stood there for a moment without going down. She looked at the water heater. She looked at the furnace. I asked if everything was okay. She said she just wanted to make sure the house was holding up. She asked if I still kept my spare key under the back porch flower pot. I said yes. She nodded. In April, I slept through the night and woke up with a headache that I can only describe as a pressure I'd never felt before, behind my eyes and at the base of my skull. I figured it was allergies. It happened twice more over the following 3 weeks, always in the morning, always after I'd had all the windows closed. I mentioned it to my doctor at a routine visit. He asked if I had a carbon monoxide detector. I told him yes, one of those combination smoke and CO detectors in the hallway. He said I should check the battery. I did. It was fine. The fourth morning headache happened on a Thursday in late May. I woke up around 5:30 feeling like my head had been packed with wet concrete. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while before I felt steady enough to walk to the kitchen. I made coffee. I opened the window above the sink. Within about 20 minutes, the headache started to ease. I stood in my kitchen and I thought about that. About the window. About the headache going away when I let the air in. I went to the furnace room. I'm not a contractor. I'm a retired history teacher. But I look at that furnace the way I used to look at a student's essay when something was off. I didn't know exactly what was wrong. I just knew something wasn't right. There was a small device attached to the exhaust coupling. I didn't touch it. I didn't recognize it. But it was clearly something that had been added, because I knew what that furnace looked like. I'd stared at it every time I changed the filter, and that piece had never been there before. I took a photograph. I went upstairs. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I called the non-emergency police line. 2 officers came that afternoon. They brought someone from the fire department who took one look at the device and made a phone call. Within an hour, there were 4 more people in my basement. The device was designed to partially obstruct the exhaust flue, not enough to trigger a typical CO detector reading immediately, but enough that over many hours in a closed house, levels would slowly accumulate. Enough, they told me, to be fatal in a deep sleep, especially for someone my age with a history of elevated blood pressure. The fire investigator asked me when it might have been installed. I said I genuinely didn't know, but the headaches had started in April. He nodded and said that tracked. He asked if anyone had access to my house. I thought about the spare key under the flower pot. I said my daughter knew where the key was. I don't know how long I sat in my living room after everyone left. They'd disabled the device and cleared the house and given me an air quality reading that was already back to normal. They'd also taken photographs and told me they'd be in contact. I had a detective's card in my hand. I didn't look at it. I looked at the phone. It was a Tuesday. 8 o'clock would come the same way it always did. I thought about what she would ask. I thought about what I would say. At 8:05, my phone rang. Dad, are you home alone tonight? And for the first time in 2 years, I said no. I told her my neighbor Ed had stopped by, that we were watching the Phillies game, that he'd probably stay until 10 or so. I made it sound ordinary. I made it sound like a Tuesday night that had nothing interesting about it at all. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not a long one, just a beat. Oh, she said. Okay, that's nice, Dad. Tell Ed I said hi. She hung up sooner than usual. The detective called me the following morning. They had pulled the security footage from the neighbor's camera across the street, one of those doorbell cameras that saves a 2-week rolling record. It showed Miriam's car parked in front of my house on the Saturday night in late March, between 11 p.m. and 1 in the morning. It showed her going in through the back gate with what appeared to be a bag. They brought her in for questioning on a Thursday. I found out through Thomas, who called me from Phoenix, sounding like he hadn't slept. He said Miriam had called him, crying, and that she told him everything, the debt, Roy, the business, all of it, and then the rest of it. I sat in my kitchen and I listened to my son tell me what my daughter had done, and I didn't say anything for a very long time. I want to be honest about what that moment felt like, because I've heard people describe things like this, and they always reach for dramatic language. Betrayal, devastation, shock, and yes, all of that. But underneath all of that was something smaller and quieter, and in some ways worse. It was the memory of every single 8 o'clock phone call. The way she said goodnight, Dad. The way she'd sounded so calm, so caring, so exactly like my daughter. That was the part that I couldn't quite put down. She hadn't done it yet. I want to be clear about that. The device was installed, but the question, "Are you home alone?" was her way of confirming conditions before she did whatever she planned to do next. When I said Ed was there, whatever that next step was, it didn't happen. What it was exactly, investigators never fully established. There was no second device found. But there was evidence she'd researched certain things on her phone that I won't detail here. I'll just say that the detectives were not confused about her intentions. She was charged with criminal attempt. The specific charge took time to work out, and I'm not going to pretend I fully understand the legal process even now. She hired a public defender. She entered a guilty plea several months later and was sentenced to 4 years, with the possibility of parole after 2. I did not attend the sentencing. Thomas went. He called me afterward and didn't know what to say, so he just described the room, the color of the walls, how many people were there, how she looked. I appreciated that. I didn't need analysis. I just needed to hear his voice. I've been asked by more than one person whether I'm angry, and I've thought about how to answer that honestly. Yes. There are mornings when I wake up and I think about those headaches and my chest goes tight and something that feels like fury sits behind my sternum for a while. I think about the spare key. I think about the way she walked to my house in March, looking at the furnace, and I feel something I don't have a clean word for. But I also think about her at 9 years old, sitting on the front steps with her chin in her hands, waiting for me to get home from baseball practice so she could tell me something that happened at school. I think about how she drove 3 hours each way, every other weekend, in the year after her mother died, just to sit with me at a kitchen table and not make me talk. I don't know how to hold both of those things at the same time. I'm not sure I'm supposed to. What I know is that she needed help long before she needed a public defender. The debt was a pressure that built and built and nobody saw it. She didn't ask for help. I would have given it not $90,000. I didn't have $90,000. But I would have figured something out. I would have tried. She didn't let me try. That's maybe the thing I circle back to most. Not the device on the furnace. Not the insurance policy. Not the 8 o'clock calls. It's that somewhere in those 2 years she was drowning, and she called me every single night and never once said she was drowning. She's in a correctional facility in Chester County now. She's receiving mental health counseling, which she needed, independent of all of this. I learned things in the aftermath of her arrest that I hadn't known. About periods of severe anxiety going back years. About a depressive episode she'd hidden from everyone when the business failed. I'm not offering that as an excuse. I'm offering it because it's part of the truth, and I decided early on that I was going to hold the whole truth, not just the part that was easiest to be angry at. Thomas flew out in August. We sat on the back porch, the way we used to when the kids were small. It was the same porch furniture, same view of the yard, and that was strange in its own way. He asked me what I was going to do. I said I was going to keep the house, update the locks, and replace the furnace. He laughed a little, and then stopped laughing. He asked if I was going to see her. I said not yet. Maybe someday. I don't know. He said that was fair. The spare key no longer lives under the flower pot. I installed the keypad lock. I got a newer CO detector, the kind with a digital readout that shows actual parts per million, not just an alarm threshold. I called George, my financial advisor, and told him I wanted to review the beneficiaries on the insurance policy. He didn't ask questions. He just scheduled the appointment. I still make my own coffee every morning. The headaches stopped the day they removed the device. I sleep through the night now, most nights, which is more than I could say for the 3 years after Sandra died. My phone rings at different times now. Thomas calls on Sunday afternoons. A few friends from school who I'd let drift have started checking in more, which I think they do out of some combination of genuine care and the strangely human instinct to be close to someone who has survived something. I don't mind. I'm glad to hear from them. Nobody calls at 8 o'clock anymore. There are nights when that silence feels like relief. And there are nights when it sits in the room with me, heavy and specific, and I think about how completely I trusted that sound. The phone ringing. Her voice. The question I always answered the same way. I don't know what lesson I'm supposed to take from this. People keep asking me that. What's the lesson, Leonard? What do you want other people to know? And I think they expect something clean. Lock your doors. Check your furnace. Don't trust anyone. But that's not it. The thing I keep coming back to is this. Love can exist alongside something very dark in the same person at the same time. I know that sounds like a thing someone stitches on a pillow, but I mean it in a literal, specific way. My daughter loved me. I believe that completely. And she also did what she did. Both of those things are true, and the space between them is where I live now. I'm 64 years old. I've got a good pension and a house that's worth more than I paid for it, and a son in Phoenix who calls on Sundays. I've got Ed across the street who actually does come over to watch Phillies games now, because I started inviting him after I used him as a cover story and felt guilty about it. I'm okay. Most days. Genuinely okay. But I'll tell you one thing that's changed permanently, and I think it's worth saying out loud. I will never again answer the question, "Are you alone?" the same way I used to. Not because I'm paranoid, not because I'm stopped trusting people, but because I finally understand that the person asking isn't always asking what you think they're asking. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself, maybe even for them, is to say no, even when the answer is yes. I've spent a lot of time since all of this happened trying to figure out where it went wrong. Not just for Miriam, but for me. For the way I was paying attention, or the way I wasn't. There's a thing that happens when you love someone deeply, and I think most parents know it without being able to name it. You start to interpret everything they do through the lens of what you already believe about them. I believed Miriam was devoted. I believed she was careful and responsible and present. So when she asked if I was alone every single night, I heard devotion. I heard worry. I heard her mother in her, Sandra, who also liked to know where everyone was before she could settle down for the evening. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't naive in other areas of my life. But love has a way of making the most obvious pattern invisible. Because you're not looking for a pattern. You're just looking at your daughter. That's not weakness. I want to be clear about that. I think it would be a mistake to walk away from the story and conclude that trust is the problem, that openness is dangerous, that the thing I should have done differently was love her less, or hold her at arm's length, or treat every phone call like an interrogation. That's not the lesson. That's just fear wearing the mask of wisdom. The real thing I keep coming back to, the thing that actually has weight when I sit with it, is about honesty. Not my honesty. Hers. Miriam carried $90,000 worth of debt and 3 years of quiet drowning without ever once letting me close enough to help. And I think about what would have happened if she'd made a different choice. If she'd called me one of those Tuesday nights at 8 o'clock and said, "Dad, I'm in real trouble. I don't know what to do." I would have picked up the phone. I would have driven to Philadelphia. I would have sat across from her at her kitchen table the same way she sat across from me at mine after her mother died, and I would have tried. That's the part that cost her everything, not the debt itself. The silence around it. There's a kind of courage that doesn't get talked about much, and it's the courage to admit you're failing before you hit bottom. It's harder than it sounds. It means trusting that the person across from you won't think less of you, won't pull away, won't confirm your worst fear about yourself, which is usually that you should have known better. Miriam didn't have that courage. And I don't say that as a condemnation. I say it as a fact about what she was carrying, and what it cost her to carry it alone. What I hope, not just for her, but for anyone who hears this story, is that the next time you're in a hole you didn't see coming, you tell someone before the hole gets deeper, not because asking for help is easy. It isn't. But because the alternative is building a life on a secret, and secrets don't stay small. I'm 64. I changed my locks, updated my furnace, and reinstated Ed from across the street as my unofficial Phillies watching companion. I call Thomas on Sundays. I make my coffee every morning. And I try every day to be the kind of person someone could call at 8 o'clock and say the real thing to. Not the easy answer, the true one. That's all any of us can do, really. Stay open enough that the people we love don't feel like they have to disappear before they ask for help.